Okay, thank you very much again. It's really important to have such great support here, and now we give opportunity for Clement to present his funding, and then we'll open floor for questions, discussions.
Well, thank you very much. This is amazing and very humbling. The topic of my dissertation is Power and Social Identity, Crisis of Legitimacy of Traditional Rule in Northern Ghana and Ethnic Conflicts. I chose this topic because for 6 years I worked at the Center for Conflict Transformation and Peace Studies in Ghana, working on the conflicts in Northern Ghana. And in each of the conflicts, I always experienced that what people said was the reason for the conflict was completely different from what the conflict was when I hit the ground investigating into the conflict. So the long and short of it all is that my argument is that the conflicts in Northern Ghana that have been described as ethnic conflicts, conflicts emanating from ancient hatreds, are nothing but a crisis of legitimacy of leadership and management of the traditional rule. A crisis emanating from the injustice that has been perpetrated by this rule. So this is basically what I have come up with. But this is my topic. I'd like to begin by acknowledging my committee. As you've heard, I've worked with both of you, Professor Korostelina and Professor Avruch, in the area of culture and power and also social identity. Because the first time I attended the class in social identity, I was like, wow, this is what I've been dealing with and this is what I need to do. So I'm really grateful for your support, your encouragement and your friendship that has brought me to this day. I'd like also to thank Father John and Scott. You heard them, they are the ones, the financial reason behind my standing here today. Father Karina, who received me at St. Charles, Father Tak, who is my current pastor, and all the parishioners from St. Charles. Each of these people you see here have played a role in my life, in the parish, and also getting me to come here to this stage. So I'm eternally grateful. Also, my family, friends, faculty, and all of you who are here. Why this research? We have a lot of protracted social conflicts between the chiefly and non-chiefly tribes, and I'll explain that shortly. In 1994, Ghana had one of the worst ethnic conflicts where over 200,000 people lost their lives. Over another 200,000 people were displaced, a lot of property was destroyed, but because of Rwanda, a lot of people didn't hear about these conflicts. So between 1980 and 2002, Ghana, the northern part of Ghana, has experienced over 30 ethnic conflicts. We call them ethnic conflicts. They're related to identity, related to power, chieftaincy, and related to land. The literature all points, the research that has been done up till date, all talk about power, legitimacy, and identity as the source of the conflict. But I've not yet come across any research that has tried to ask the question, what is the relationship between power, legitimacy, and identity, and how does that impact the conflict? So this is what I wanted to look into. And on power, I'm particularly interested in what is the indigenous concept of power. You know, usually when you have anthropologists investigating a culture, they like to walk into the community, look for the oldest person in the community, assuming that wisdom resides in that person and the fellow has the history and tradition. But what I did was I was interested in what is the street man's perception of power. So there is this knowledge gap. The literature doesn't explain this. The literature neither explores the indigenous, the relationships. So I try to explain the relationship between identity formation, power, and legitimacy, to explore the indigenous understanding of power and how that understanding is used in conflicts. Also to explore the implications of an indigenous understanding of power for conflict analysis and resolution. Because in all the conflicts, power played a role. So using theories of social identity, power, and legitimacy, I try to explain the sources, dynamic, and consequences of the conflicts in the region. So my research questions try to explore the processes and motives for group identity formation. Why do people form groups, and how does that group formation influence their behavior and their perception of reality? And also the indigenous understanding of power in Northern Ghana and how this has influenced the perception of chieftaincy as a core element in ethnic identity. There are a group of people in northern Ghana who define themselves as a chiefly people, and I'll explain that shortly. So how did chieftaincy come to be a core element of social identity? And just to give a small idea of what I mean here, one day I'm working with one of my employees, it's raining, and I pull my cassock up and run for shelter. And he walks majestically to the building and he's all drenched. I looked at him and I was like, are you a fool? He said, no, you don't understand. I'm a prince and princes do not run. You know? So he has in his mind that he is a prince. And so it's raining, he's getting wet, but he's not going to run. So you can imagine when this identity is touched or threatened, that this person will fight and fight to the end. So the map of Africa, Ghana is somewhere here. So as you can see, I wanted to put Peter's map there, but this takes the United States, it takes China, it takes Russia, so Africa is huge. Now, in Ghana, we have 10 regions. So my area of focus is the northern region. I come from the Upper West region, but I'm a missionary priest in the northern region, and a lot of the conflicts are taking place here. So we need to also understand why the conflicts are so peculiar to the northern region. Because if you go to Ghana and say Ghana is a peaceful country, except in the north. Now, these are the districts in the northern region. These districts, for instance, Sola, Tuna, Kalba, there are over 5 ethnic groups living in this district. In the West Gonja, it's mainly the Gonja, Central Gonja. So we have about 17 different ethnic groups in the northern part of Ghana. Now, something happened during the colonial intervention that these 4 kingdoms took control over the whole land. And that was a colonial policy. So you can imagine, these are different ethnic groups, and through that policy, this is the kind of map you have. So it is only in the northern region that you have this, that all the ethnic groups are put under these 4 tribes. Now, the colonial government put all its force behind and used this for administration. So then what happens after independence? You know, what happens? So this is the situation of the northern region. And so some of the theoretical frameworks that I'm using is looking at theories of identity, social identity. You know, like Teichfeld talks about identity as that part of an individual's self-conception which derives from knowledge of membership in a social group, together with the value and emotional significance attached to that membership. So I'm dealing with when somebody, for instance, I think I am an American. The flag has a certain meaning to me. So trying to understand this social, psychological dynamic and how that impacts conflicts. So social identity theory, social categorization also explores how people are able to act psychologically in a collective way as group members. So these social identity theories help me to understand in-group bias, social conflict, and intergroup relations in society. Because just looking at social identity already broadens the scope. That it's not just about ethnic identity, it could be other social identities. Power. Now, the traditional concept of power is that the ancestors give you power. You get power from the tradition. If you're a chief, you're a king. We have Nana here with us, one of the traditional chiefs in the Ghanaian community this year. Your power comes from your stool, it comes from your ancestors. But the theories of power show that human beings generate and deploy power in their social relations and interactions in a given context. Understanding this is important. If we generate power, then we also have the capacity to use this power or to redefine this power in such a way that it enhances human development rather than destroy human development. So you have 2 concepts of power. Power as a tangible object. Tangible, objective, measurable phenomenon that is nested in people, systems, or structures. So it's something I can hold. So power as capacity, ability, or potential to dominate or resist domination. But you also have power as a social construct nested in social interactions and relationships. That wherever you have people coming together and relating, there is some form of power dynamics. Theories of legitimacy. On what basis are you the traditional authority over me? who gives you the right to demand or to claim certain obligations from me? And what makes me ready to act? Why is it that some people, when their king gets up and says, we are going tomorrow to destroy that village, everybody mobilizes and goes? In other places, they will look, why should we go? So legitimacy, what is it? So it explores the basis and justification for believing that authorities, institutions, and social arrangements are appropriate, proper, and just, and the feeling of obligation to adhere to their demands and requests. This will play an important role in analyzing the conflicts in northern Ghana, because some of the non-chiefly tribes are beginning to question the legitimacy or the claims of the chiefs over them and over land. So the right to make claims and the obligation to acquiesce in the moral basis of social interaction, behavior, and structure. So these three pillars help me analyze the conflicts in northern Ghana. So what is the relationship between the three? Social influence is the basis for power and legitimacy. Because sometimes you think that, oh, if there is a power, people will then organize their social identity around the power. No. It is the social identity, the group of people coming together, the alliances and the relationships that generates the kind of power that emerges. Social identity, not resources, is the context in which claim to power and legitimacy are made. So you have tribes who say, God created us to rule over you. God gave us this land, so we can do whatever we want with it. Group identities become the basis for claims to the right to rule and the recognition of that right to rule. Now, how did I go about investigating this? I tried to explain the situation of the conflicts in northern Ghana using the exploratory approach, case study. And why am I doing this? Because I'm looking for a holistic and in-depth understanding of the cultural systems of action that is sets of interrelated activities engaged in by actors in a social situation. So how do people engage in these activities and why do they do that? I'm looking for patterns in indigenous conceptions of power and processes used by chiefs to legitimize their power through ethnic identities. And cases were selected based on the chiefly and non-chiefly groups and conflicts about chieftaincy, land, and recognition. So how did I get my participants to interview? I look at them and say, okay, I want to interview 40 people. I want 20 people from a chiefly tribe and 20 people from a non-chiefly tribe. Now, these 20 people must have experienced an ethnic conflict, a chieftaincy conflict, or a land conflict. Now, when I talk about chiefly people, a chief is like the traditional leader in the American Indians. You know, it's a local leader. It's usually the oldest male in the community. So it's only in the northern region that you have whole ethnic groups that are defined non-chiefly. In every tribe you have the royal family. Now some tribes, they had a system of leadership that was not chieftaincy. But when the colonialists came, they said, we don't understand this one, we understand the chieftaincy system, let us use that one. So those tribes that had no chiefs, they created chiefs. In my tribe, for instance, we have a chief, but nobody respects the chief. But there are some tribes, these were people who migrated from the north into West Africa, settled among the people, intermarried, and then they had a kind of class among themselves. I'll explain that later as we look at the trans-Sahara slave trade. So once the colonialists finished the process of pacification, breaking up the kingdoms, they started what they call amalgamation, bringing different chiefs or different communities together under one chief. It was only in the northern region they succeeded. In the other regions, every tribe have their chief, but in the northern region, you have a lot of tribes that are put under one chief. So I did purposive sampling for relevant cases. Participants were from the chiefly group, as I mentioned, and then a total of 40. So I tried to get stories from people about powerful chiefs. You know, if you go and you ask somebody, define power, they're like, what kind of power, what are you talking about? But if I say, tell me a story about a powerful chief, I can get some ideas from that. So stories about powerful chiefs fill based, semi-structured, face-to-face interviews. I also looked at some historical documents to be able to understand the origin of the violence, published research work, and then, so this informed my data collection, and then I used the progressive analysis of data for patterns, themes, categories, So once I transcribed all the interviews, I just kind of read through them to see, can I begin to see some patterns? And what are these patterns? What are the themes coming up? And how are they related? So only those who had been involved in a conflict were chosen, and of course, I informed them they were free to either participate or not participate. What were some of the challenges? And that's where statistics comes in. So some of the percentages, how do you calculate those percentages? Enumeration. The number of participants, I had 40 people. That's what I used, because I noticed that if I wanted to do a word count, one word may mean different things at different times. It will be a bit confusing. So I used the number of participants for my calculating my percentages. So interview questions were based on previous research and on the theoretical framework. So I didn't just pick this. I made sure that these interview questions were informed by previous work and also by theory, so that at least I could understand what was going on. I tape recorded all the interviews, and this also gave me the opportunity to be able to observe participants' reactions. Are they comfortable with the question or not? How are they reacting to the question? So all this helped me. So findings. The data reveals a sense of pride in belonging to a group. 62.5% of the participants talked about it. They feel proud that they belong. A sense of self-identification with a particular ethnic group. Now the reason for feeling connected to the ethnic group is culture. Everybody says culture, culture. But when you drill down, they're talking about the language, the history, the tradition, cultural practices, even food. Somebody looked at me, he knew very well I come from a tribe that eats dogs, and he looks at me and says, in our tribe we don't eat dogs. So that's the difference between me and you. Now, here is a quote from one of the participants that captures this need to belong. There is the need to belong and not to be alone. Not to belong is to be like a floating vessel. Because of my ethnic identity, people just don't see me as an individual, but as a member of a group. It is important to belong to a group. It gives me a sense of belonging. And this finding is basically goes with the theory of social identity, this desire to belong to a group, to have security in the group. This statement from a participant underlines the individual's need to belong to the group. The feeling of belonging to a social group, the strong connection to the culture, tradition, and history of the group impacts participants' perception and behavior. Two foci of social identity emerged from the data. You have the Tindana and the chief. Now, the Tindana is a religious leader centered on the earth shrine, who assumes and is given a leadership role in the cultural, social, and political affairs of the group. Now, these various families were migrants. They were moving around looking for farmland. So if a family found a good farmland, they settled there. The father of the house becomes the Tindana. He's a kind of priest. So he offers sacrifice for peace, for a good rain, and for a good harvest. So when you have a number of families coming together, the oldest male in the family becomes the one who offers the sacrifice, the Tindana. Now, as these communities settled and expanded, this simple family ritual expanded to become a form of social leadership. Now, in an undifferentiated society, all the leadership roles are vested in one person. So he is the lawyer, he is the doctor, he is the one to go to consult, he's the teacher, he's everything. So sometimes they say that the Tindana did not have a traditional leadership. It is not a centralized form of leadership. It's not true. It's not a chieftaincy system, but they had a system. So then you have the chieftaincy, so which is a social political leader in the group who reaches up to clothe his role with cultural symbols. Now, how did the chieftaincy arise in the northern part of Ghana? In some of the past, especially in the south, chieftaincy has always been part of the ethnic group. But in the northern part of Ghana, these migrants, warriors, came in and settled among the people. They intermarried in the community, and they were quite well organized, and also many of them came on horses and spears, so they had the military power. And when they started the Trans-Sahara slave trade, you needed a military force to protect the caravans that were coming to buy cola in the south and go up. And once the slave trade began, these people suddenly realized that there was a great market in buying and selling human beings. So what they did was they now started raiding communities, catching slaves and selling them to the caravans. So it was a kind of a political organization that had nothing to do with the indigenous communities. So they settled in pockets. But they were very well organized. Now, if you're doing this kind of raiding, you better have a hierarchy of authority and power. And they had also resources, because they're guiding the caravans. They had a lot of money. Now, these are sedimentary farmers. You know, they depend on the rain for farms, so many of them just depend on their food. But after some time, this class of people had enough money to be able to organize themselves. But two distinct socializations yielding two families mobilized around the Tindana and the chief. Now, understanding of power is based on these two primary identities. So you have the Tindana family, and then you have the chiefly family. There's only one tribe in the northern region where the Tindana and the chief are one and the same person. Now, when I ask the people, who are the people with power? If you look at the totals, there isn't that much difference. The chiefly group people and the non-chiefly, so this is the Tindana. The Tindana is slightly over the chief as someone with power in the community. But when you ask who is more important, when you look at their local identities, so the non-chiefly immediately has the Tindana as 80% more powerful than the chief. And so you see a big difference in the power, the definition of the power of the chief. And this is, so the non-chiefly people identify with the Tindana, the chiefly groups identify with the chief. So on the basis of social mobilization, two distinct structures of power existed and functioned. The power of the Tindana, which was like a ritual leader, and the power of the chief, a political leader. Now, in the pre-colonial times, these systems existed peacefully, and they kind of complemented each other. There wasn't a problem. So you see the sources of power. Even the chiefly people acknowledge that land is the source of power of the Tindana. When it comes to royal family, you don't see much. And then people. So from the participants, they are very clear that the power of the Tindana comes from the land. Look at the power of the chief. They are very clear. You won't see not even the chiefly people, very few of them. But these small numbers you see here are because one part of the participants have both the Tindana, have the Tindana as both the chief and the Tindana. So that accounts for that. But you see that it's very clear in the minds of the people that the power of the chief does not come from land. Now, how is this power used? You see clearly that the Tindana, even the chiefly people, say that the Tindana's use of his power is to pacify the land. Not leadership, but to pacify the land. So the chief cannot pacify the land. So if the land is the source of power, then it is the Tindana who is the most powerful. And the uses of the power of the chief is very clear for leadership and for well-being. It's very interesting to see that power is always defined in terms of service to the people and well-being of the community. Then in comes the colonial administration. The colonial administration puts a political framework over the pre-colonial traditional patterns of the people as I have just described. They privilege the chieftaincy as the traditional form of leadership and categorize communities into chiefly and non-chiefly groups, thus sidelining and diminishing the office of the Tindana. Now, in the southern part of Ghana, where they do not have Tindanas, this was not a problem. But in the northern part, where the Tindana is in charge of the land and then the chief is just a political leader, there was a problem here. When the colonial administration said, okay, from now onwards, the chief is going to be the head and he's going to be in charge of everything. So the two previously complementary systems of power started separating. The chief assumed all political power and the Tindana lost political power and his spiritual role became more significant. In this political dispensation for the chief, taking hold of political cultural symbols became even more important. Because until now they didn't have the cultural symbols to back their power. But now that the colonial administration has given them this power, they need to develop a base. So they start coming up with stories to establish themselves and to justify why they are entitled to this power. In independent Ghana, this political framework is carried forward and is constitutionalized in the state chief alliance. So the state chief alliance that was built at the colonial time was carried into the independent state. And not only did they allow it to continue, they constitutionalized it. And even today, as I speak, in the constitution, the government is powerless to do anything about chieftaincy, especially when it comes to the election of chiefs. This alliance delegitimizes the power and social status of the office of the Tindana as a traditional authority having the power and authority to legislate on land rights. Thus, in the northern region, belonging to a chiefly group meant access to political power, respect, recognition, and land rights. Even today, if you're looking for the mayor of Arlington, you have to be somebody who belongs to the Arlingtonian tribe. They are not looking at your expertise, you know. So I've been born and I grew up here. I want to serve my country, but simply because I do not belong to the chiefly tribe, I cannot be able to serve. Chieftaincy is privileged as the legitimate system of traditional governance with power, status, and prestige. In the northern region, the 13 non-chiefly tribes have been subordinated to and included under the jurisdiction of the 4 tribes. That's the map I showed you there, the 4 kingdoms. In this new ordering, members of the chiefly tribes draw their cultural and political identity from the power, status, and prestige of the chief, and through the chief have access to land, economic, social, and political power. So all of a sudden, the history of the chiefly people just blossomed. And in this situation, you are not interested in historical facts. You are interested in creating a narrative that you can sell. Members of the non-chiefly tribes draw their cultural identity from the Tindana, and not being a chiefly people, have restricted access to land, economic, social, and political power. Now, such restriction is a source of tension, often leading to conflict. Now, in the northern region, imagine your family has always settled on this land. This is your tribal land. Even when the chief wants to offer a sacrifice for peace, it is your father who does it. And yet you cannot plant on that land without permission from the chief. And when you harvest, you have to pay tribute to the chief. Now, things came to the head in 1978. It was a military dictatorship that wanted to democratize itself at Champong's time. So they wanted a kind of union government. Now, the northern politicians from these chiefly tribes saw this as an opportunity. If you want our votes, in the south, the land belongs to the chiefs. In the north, the land belongs to the state. Right? Send the land back to the chiefs in the north, and then you have our vote. So before 1978, all lands in the northern region were vested in the state. In 1979, the state divested these lands to the chiefs. Chiefs became the traditional authority in all land matters. But in the minds of the people, when it comes to land, it's the Tindana. It's the family land, not the chief. Now, once chiefs got this new power, what did they do? They started selling the land. You know, at present, we are still dealing with a problem in Dabong, in the northern part, where the chief was beheaded. And for the first time, I was threatened when I asked the question, if you want to know why the king was beheaded, then there is one question to ask. In the 27 years that he was king, what did he do or not do to make somebody hate him to the extent of wanting to cut off his head? 2 people walked out from that meeting, and for the first time, my life was threatened. You know, so the chiefs took this power, and then they started selling the land indiscriminately. Now, shortly after this declaration, the non-chiefly tribes begin to mobilize and contest the legitimacy of this new power given to the chiefs. They begin asking to have their own tribal chiefs recognized by the state. Okay, if chieftaincy is the basis for having land and having this power, political and traditional, then give us our own chiefs. And that was the Konkomba demand. And in the text, there are some very interesting things the chiefs say in response to the Konkomba demands for land. And so, in 1980, the first conflict over chieftaincy and land erupted in the northern region among the Varlas, the non-chiefly, and then the Gonjas. And since then, we've had about 30-something conflicts in the region. What baffles me is that everybody is like, oh, these people are fighting because of certain ethnic squabbles. The downside of saying that this is a conflict about tradition and culture is to also say that, okay, if it's a conflict about tradition and culture, then let's leave it to the cultural experts. So even the situation in northern Ghana now, the Dagomba chief conflict there, they've asked the king of Ashanti to mediate, because they think that as the king of Ashanti, he's a traditional or a cultural expert. But the conflict is not about tradition, it's not about conflict, as we have seen. The conflicts in northern Ghana, northern region, are not ethnic disputes over chieftaincy and land. They are not conflicts about culture and tradition, implying that only experts in culture can resolve the conflicts. They are conflicts in reaction to the political and economic injustices precipitated by the chiefs in the name of defending their cultural role and tradition. The conflicts seek to overcome this injustice. There is a need to redefine the primary role of the chief as cultural, relegating chieftaincy's political role to the state. Because local governance and democracy has created a problem. In the olden days, everything was centered in the chief's palace. There were the police and everything. Today, if you want something to do with the law, you go to the court or you go to the police station. So the society has differentiated, and there are different roles. So there's a crisis between the role of the chief in a democratic dispensation and the role of local government. So the legitimacy of chiefs and any cultural authority for that matter in a democratic state is the dilemma of African and of any constitutionalism. Somebody described this as the dilemma of African constitutionalism, where you have 2 powers in the same state. Now, who is the sovereign power? This is the challenge. So on the one hand, the chiefs are having a problem with the government over who is powerful, because the chief believes, I am the overlord here, I should be in charge. But they see that the government is more powerful than them. And then the second level of the conflict is the non-chiefly people are saying, if chieftaincy is the basis for accessing political power and resources, then we want our own chiefs. But government knows very well that they need the chiefs to win elections, and nobody is ready to move. So this is the situation. You know, but up till now, most of the research have always focused on, oh, these people are fighting because of ancient hatred. They're fighting because of culture. Let's leave them alone. So now that I have discovered this, what's the way forward? The interesting thing about this is, I've not really found anything new, but I now have a method to be able to justify some of the conclusions and to be able to do further research. So what I intend to do with this is to develop a dialogue with chiefs about their role and function in Ghana today and the Ghana that is becoming. You know, if you go to the Ghana web and you Google chieftaincy, 80% of the articles on chieftaincy are about conflict. So there is the need to have a dispassionate discourse about the role of the traditional chieftaincy system in the Ghana that we have today and not the Ghana of yesteryears. Now the challenge is, how do we do this? How do we carry out this dialogue? I'm looking forward to develop with the chiefs an understanding of the role and function of a cultural authority vis-a-vis a political, economic, technological authority in the society. You see, somebody like the Ashanti king has a lot of power but it's not political power. He's the one person in Ghana who can call the president to order. So I do believe that in the Ghanaian society there is a place for chieftaincy, but it's not a political power. It's not an economic power or technological power. How do I get them to come with this? In collaboration with the Institute of Local Government Studies and the regional houses of chiefs, I'm looking forward to develop an ongoing formation program for chiefs. Fortunately, there is a center in Northern Ghana that I was running before coming here, and I'm going back there. So I hope to be able to take these findings there and find a way of developing them. What is the way forward? Using the findings in this research to develop the curriculum at the Center for Conflict Transformation and Peace Studies, Sekotabs Ghana, and explore the possibilities for further research and on social identity, power, and legitimacy of the traditional authority system. As you have noticed, I'm not coming up with some policy advice for government, because all the research concludes with policy advice for government, policy advice for this, and it ends there. So if I can get the chiefs to come up with something, then we begin to develop the policy from within, and once they buy into it and bring it up, I think we'll be able to move forward. Thank you, and come and see me in Ghana.